one of the things that interested me, I've been wondering why I put this poem first, and why I closed my eyes. And you might have been wondering yourself why I closed my eyes at the end of this poem. And I thought it was really bizarre until last week I noticed I had to record the whole book. And so I spent 2 days in the studio recording it, and I realized that many, many poems in the book, the eyes are closed. In one poem, I'm there with my daughter, we both close our eyes. And so I started wondering what it was like, and in order to figure out the ending of this poem, I just closed my eyes and acted it out to try to figure out, like, what was I writing when I wrote this? Which is an interesting thing about poetry, because it's made up of all this material, and you spend an enormous amount of time working on it from a point of view of technique and sound and music and modulation and making sure the stresses go and everything else, but the about part is what you leave to others. And I became the other and acted it out, and I realized that what was really interesting about closing your eyes, especially if you see in this first poem, I'm walking along a border between ocean and land, and so if you close your eyes, the horizon disappears. So the relationship to forward motion, or the idea that motion is forward driven or forward directed, is slightly interfered with, or perhaps even balanced by a sense that you might be in the present in a kind of cantilevered way, in which the left and right side of the present, peripheral vision, intuitive part of the self rather than frontal vision, perhaps something that is more in the moment rather than filled with the sensation of destination, which drives the walking, takes place at the end. So I thought that was something useful for those of you who unfortunately have to hear this for the second or third time, might add. Oh, wonderful. Yes, there's other stuff happening in this poem. Sometime the day light winces behind you, and it is a great treasure in this case today, a man on a horse in calm, a full gallop on Omaha over my left shoulder, coming on fast but calm, not audible to me at all, until I turned back my head for no reason, as if what lies behind one had whispered, "What can I do for you today?" And I had just turned to answer, and the answer to my answer flooded from the front with the late sun they were driving into, gleaming. Wet chest and upraised knees and light-struck hooves and thrust-out even breathing of the great beast from just behind me, passing me. The rider looking straight ahead and yet smiling without looking at me, as I smiled, as we both smiled for the young animal, my feet in the breaking wave edge, his hooves returning as they begin to pass by to the edge of the furling break, each tossed up flake of ocean offered into the reddish luminosity, sparks as they made their way, boring through to clear out life, a place where no one again is suddenly killed, regardless of the cause. No one. Just this galloping forward with force through the low waves, seagulls scattering all round, their screeching and mewing rising like more bits of red foam, the horse's hooves now suddenly louder as it goes by, and its prints on the wet sand deep and immediately filled by thousands of sand fleas, thrilled to the declivities in succession in the newly released beach, just at the right moment for some microscopic life to rise up through these cups in the hard upslant. Retreating ocean is revealing. Sand flees finding them just as light does, carving them out with shadow, and glow on each ridge, and water oozing up through the innermost cut of the hoof steps. And when I shut my eyes now, I am not like a blind person walking towards the lowering sun, the water loud at my right, but like a seeing person with her eyes shut, putting her feet down, one at a time, on the earth. I realized that the whole motion was like the form of the poems as well, which was kind of interesting to realize that there's this space-time axis in which you can position yourself. I mean, closing the eyes has to do with opening what one would call the third eye, or a different relationship to the future, and having spent so much time in my prior book trying to negotiate with the sensation of futurity and with the placement of the self, which I only do in a few poems in this book, in a much future time looking back at this time. I sort of tried to put myself into this time. I think what I did in this book was try to figure out how, without self-blinding at the crossroads, okay, which is a form of what I was just describing, in order to have your fate come upon you, to still be able to live in the world with the capacity to praise, which is harder to do than I thought could be. Should I read one more? Do you want to read a second poem? Do I really have to read Kindness to America? I would like to read a very different one that I never read. Of Inner Experience. Did I read this one the other night? No, I didn't read this one. Okay. Eyes shut. See, it's like I couldn't believe it. I went through the book and I thought, oh my God, I should deal with this. It's fantastic how much not knowing goes into something which is made out of so much knowing. I mean, the level of knowing at the level of the syllable is, and of the musical strategy, and is just astonishing. I mean, the level of revision is incredible, and the fantastic way in which negative capability exerts its presence well, it just makes you feel how mysterious having inwardness can be. Of Inner Experience. Eyes shut, I sense I am awakening, and then I am awake but deciding to keep eyes shut. Look at the inside, stay inside, in the long and dark of it. If it were a garden, what would I plant in it? For now I am alive, I think, I feel. Who among you will tell me after all this time the difference? And yet now, and yet again now, I am alive. I'm going to do this over. Eyes shut, I sense I am awakening, and then I am awake, but deciding to keep eyes shut. Look at the inside, stay inside, in the long and dark of it. If it were a garden, what would I plant in it? For now I am alive, I think, I feel. Who among you will tell me after all this time the difference? And yet again now I am alive. And what does that mean, lying here, eyes closed, first winter morning coming on all round? Yes, this is the start of winter, is what my body, sensing a new disequilibrium, says, hypnotized, trembling with fiction, love, the sensation of time passing, and fear of atemporality. And this is the play of heaven, the mind inside this body, lying here, still alive for now, thinks. If you could only see my body, and beyond me the three windows in the room, letting the uninvented in, and how true it is, because of the closed eyes on my human being lying there in the room, glistening with plenitude, all conquest gone from the air. You could say, here God owns everything. It is a discharge of duration, The floor, the panes, the mirror, the single stalk of freesia, the gilded frame, the two lion claw-footed chairs, and the tree knots still in the floors. Someone laid in 1890. The wormholes here and there in them from those creatures worked long ago, not long after the counter-revolution, the troubles and the wreck here of consciousness, as long as the person's eyes stay shut, beyond the limits of thought. And who am I then? And don't go there, says my hand, as I need it, my hand here in this writing. And yet I am also lying on the bed, eyes closed, and keeping them so. God owes us everything, I think, from out here. There is not God, I think, lying in the non-dark of the mind, eyes closed, hearing the crows rustling in the nearest trees, the hay fork in the next field. I want to pray, says the person behind the eyes. You cannot do so, I say with these fingers. I want to break the dark with the idea of God, says the non-sleeping person on her back in the beginning of the 21st century, trying to hold on to duration, which is slipping as she speaks, as I write, active translator. Look, I can make a tale of the sinking sun. I can begin a summer again here. Here are its swallows. They have just returned. Look up, but no, they did not come back after that year. We waited, but here they are again. Do not be fooled. Here, breaking their circles across the evening air, and there is still sun up near the children's bedtime. And we still say bedtime. It is a habit, and the bells ring vespers or the recording of it. And somewhere there must still be a crafty animal digging a long tunnel under this strange, hard ground, finding some moisture in there, turning it grain by grain. Perhaps there is still the creature which, when it was known as the blind mole somewhere. And for this part of the reading, this one, which sort of complicates it. Dialogue of the imagination sphere. All around in houses near us, the layoffs, the windows shine back sky. It is a wonder we can use the word free and have it mean anything at all to us. We stand still, let the cold wind wrap round, go into hair in between fingers. The for sale signs are bent and ripple in wind. One had fallen last fall, and snowmelt is re-revealing it again. Rattle in ground wind, siding, weakening on everything. Spring. Underneath the bulbs want to clear the sill of dark and find the sun. I see them now under there, in there, soggy with melt, and loam which is loosening as their skins rot, to let the whitest tendrils out. Out they go, snaking everywhere, till the leaves are blurring. They fur out, they exist. Another year's loan to time, and the bud will form in the sleeve of the silky leaf, and they will quietly among the slow-working pigeons, and there where a dog is leaping in almost complete invisibility, make slim heads thicken. I am ill, you know, says the man walking by, his dog pulling him. So much joy, and nothing will make it more or less. The flower as alive as it is dead, above which the girl with earphones walks humming. No one has warned her, yet she is free. But why, says the imagination, have you sent me down here, down among the roots, as they finally take hold? It is hard. They wrench. The loam is not easy to open. I cannot say it, but the smell is hope meeting terrifying regret. I would say, do not open again. Do not go up. Stay under here. There is no epic. We are in something, but it is not the world. Why try to make us feel at home down here? Take away the poem. Take away this desire that has you entering this waste, dark space. There are not even pockets of time here. There are no mysteries. There is no laughter, and nothing ever dies. The foreclosure you are standing beside, look to it. There is a woman crying on the second floor as she does not understand what it will be like not to have a home now, and how to explain to the children at 3:35 when the bus drops them off. The root is breaking its face open and shoving up to escape towards sun. Nothing can stop it, though right now the repo men have not yet come. The school bus is only just getting loaded up. The children pooling, squealing. Some stare out the window. Kiss the soil as you pass by. It is coming up to kiss you. Bend down to me. You have placed me here. Look to me on all fours. Drink of the puddle. Look hard at the sky in there. It is not sky. It is not there. The flames of sun, which will come out just now for a blinding minute into your eyes, is saving nothing, no one. Take your communion. Your blood is full of barren fields. They are the future in you. You should learn to feel and love. There will be no more. No more, not enough to go around. No more around, no more. Love that.
Let's see, can you hear us? Okay.
I assume you can all hear.
You
If the
can
mic
hear.
went out, you can still hear me, right?
You can hear.
Yeah.
Um, you don't want to start.
I think it's fine. I don't know what happened. Sorry.
Thank you for reading those poems. I'm so glad you ended with that poem. You've already answered so many of the questions that I was going to pose in your introductory remarks. But first, I just want to say to everyone what a really remarkable book Place is. If you haven't read it, I think it's just an extraordinary book. It reaches out to touch on so many different things, ethical concerns, social concerns, ecological concerns, personal ones. But something you said struck me. You talked about the extraordinary difficulty of praise, I think. And there's a moment in this last poem we read that those of you who weren't reading along might not know happened. It's a very singular moment.
Not one of the mistakes?
Not a mistake, I hope, but it's a moment I love. It's an exclamation point.
Free.
The leaves are blurring, they exist.
Oh, yes.
Exclamation point. Gosh, I think it's one of the very few, if not the only one.
Exclamation mark? I think,
In the book.
shouldn't there be one next to spring?
Yes, there's one next to spring
Yes,
also.
always one
Yes,
next to spring,
there's
because of
one next to
Williams.
spring, because of Williams. And I was gonna say, when I think of exclamation points well used, I think of Williams. It feels like a different kind of gesture in your poems. And since you had just talked about praise, and there is these two exclamation points, I wonder if you could.
Well, later in life and Sea Change, I had the same feeling. I associate that particular feeling with, in that you could almost say it's what the bulb does. It's when the bulb is, the loam is starting to allow the bulb to break free, and it, the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. I mean, there's nothing that you can do to stop it. And it's just life itself, like the imagination, undertaking this unbelievable energy and moving up with it. So it's exclamatory, and the exclamation mark comes as in the world of the natural, inevitable forces that in this book have a chance every now and then to, in the present moment, they exist untrammeled. I mean, we're living in a very schizophrenic time when we are, I think, I don't know how many of you read the story in last week's Times about the preparations being made on the West Coast, because California is always thinking a little ahead about sort of abandoning the coastline and deciding that the ocean was actually going to rise, and rather rapidly in the next 20 years. And so rather than polluting and contaminating the ocean, something that I really hope dearly that someone would think of, they're just removing houses, pulling back, removing sewage, removing anything and allowing the ocean to simply reclaim land. Something that the East Coast still has not figured out and is fantasizing about seawalls. These things, have to, that kind of rising of water would be an indication, not just of a sort of a mess along the coastline, which you want to avoid, but an indication of I don't know if you're familiar with some of the terminology that climate change people use. I think it's urgent that everyone become familiar with it, but it's indicative of a rise in general temperature that's over 360 parts per million, which means that, people 5-6 generations from now probably would not have a place that was habitable. So how are we supposed to think in relation to those people? What are we supposed to do? It's an act of imagination that people like Bill McKibben are really pleading with writers and artists to undertake. And yet, how do you convince other people, let alone yourself, that the very decision you're making, the very next decision you're making about, what you're going to use, what you're going to purchase, how you're going to, fuel your vehicle, whatever you're going to do, how can you think about the styrofoam cup you're going to use or not in relation to someone 10,000 years from now, thinking that it's a direct thread to them, and that the decision you're making for people you do not even know will exist, but you also cannot imagine will exist. People traditionally can only think 3 generations ahead to their great-grandchildren. It's very difficult. So with that in mind, how come back and say the bulb that's going to put up this crocus again? I don't want to live in a world where I bypass that because of all the rest I've been talking about. So that balancing act is difficult, and the equipoise in it is never really anything but momentary, and you have to have both. You can't sort of, it's a disgrace to not love and acknowledge and be able to fully see and imaginatively grasp and inhabit and let yourself be inhabited by what the world, what I like to think of as just creation, puts forth. It's a kind of, it oxygenates you. It doesn't just clean the air. When the leaves come out, they actually come and they give you. You look at what's happening if your soul is open to it. You too are being, filtered and cleaned by yet another spring. So it's not just dishonorable. It's probably sacrilegious to not acknowledge the extraordinary multitude and power and beauty of the world. Lifting it from historical pressures and from the pressures of catastrophe. And yet, so much comes out of denial at this point in history that one has to sort of try to keep both alive at once. So this book is really written from this. I think that's what the closing of the eyes and the opening of a third eye. It's not like we don't know. I just want to be able to figure out how, the word equipoise is really the one that comes to me, how to be able to live with the sense of the macro and the micro, and to be able to live a very full life without mourning and yet without delusion. It's complicated. I don't think humans have been asked to do this before. I think it's quite unique. I think that one's personal death or the death of one's tribe or community or family have been the places where the catastrophic edges of existence have been located for humans from the beginning of time. One's tribe could be wiped out. The idea that we can imagine the entire planet being in a situation of absolute risk, not just, things like rising water. I'm not sure the human imagination was built to be able to do that. And I think that it's a good practice, and that this book is about that.
I think one thing that works so well in poems is the way that they, I think of a line, as we're trying to see the line that Helen down there used in one of your books, talking about the tension in the work between the impulse to hurry and name it, and delay and be it. And a word that comes up a lot in this book is duration, or it comes up several times. And one thing that works so well to ground these concerns, I think,
it's a wedding that's going to take place the next day,
Right.
and the way that the battle is going to take place the next day in the first book, and the way the repoment haven't arrived yet, and the idea that we're in an incipient, in a lull, in a moment which we should live in. We should not live in it. I think duration is a very interesting term because it's quite different from time. It's undergone time, and so that first poem is interesting to me also because of some other things that happen in it. I do love your description about the past and the future because I think of the poem's form as being very much, if you look at them, all of the lines that are on the fault line in the middle, everything that's in the past of the poem is exactly the same number of positions or spaces, and the lines are identical. And everything that involves the future is irregular in duration. So that's something that makes me sort of, I've thought about that very carefully. That's why I want the line positioned in the center and not, I also think of these as a kind of strange set of haikus, but that's just for myself.
So long lines.
Yeah.
That could be read just one with one of each other.
These are, yeah, you could read these, but that's just, like an artsy trick on my part. What I really like about what you were just saying is that, for me in that first poem, history and geography collide, and it's part of what, and pulling them apart. I mean, we take for granted the way in which they're related to each other. That horse on that beach is not just Yeats and everything that we think of that when we think of the rider on the horse, which is a long tradition, is an image in a poem. But William the Conqueror rode on that beach. It's very interesting. That beach is called Omaha by the Allied forces, but it's titled Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer in the subtitle in the poem because that's its name. And William the Conqueror not only rode on that beach on horses, so that much earlier era of warfare is present, while the infantry person is sort of in the position of the narrator, so that the two different historical periods are present. But part of what happens is we sort of try to wipe away history and turn it back into beach and turn it back into geography, so that the microscopic life. And one of the most interesting things about the Battle of Omaha, which is obviously a very deadly battle made famous in Saving Private Ryan, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it. But that beach was a sick beach. The way you know if a beach is sick is if you walk on it and it's scrunchy and your feet go down, that means that the capillaries, when it's a beautiful thing, but when a wave pulls back, it makes a tiny wind, and the wind sends a tiny bit of sand up the beach. And that tiny bit of sand, while the water is draining down this way and back out, allows for the beach to be built with every single wave. And if the capillaries stop draining, the beach is basically a dying beach. And the only thing that could make a dying beach not, it would be dead within 50 or 60 years, the beach would no longer build itself. The only thing that could make a beach basically come back to life would be like taking, wearing a Cuisinart to it. You have to chop the beach up. Well, the D-Day saved Omaha Beach and made it an incredibly healthy beach because every tank and every piece of equipment for, about 18 weeks just chopped up the whole beach. And it's hard to set out to do that to a beach. One wouldn't do it. So here's this incredible, unbelievable piece of geography saved by a piece of history that we think of as an atrocity. And sort of there's another place where we're trying to balance, we do privilege human life and the loss of human life. But what is the loss of or the rescuing or the bringing to life of the capillaries of the story of the beach? So I was very aware of that when I was writing about the microscopic life that comes up through the cups and abstinence. A form of writing on the beach too, which the book reminds me.
The declivities and the specificity. That's amazing. I didn't know that about Omaha.
No, it's just so
beautiful beach.
Yeah, it's very, very, very beautiful. It's also a very, it's had so many wars on it, and it's had so many. William the Conqueror left from that beach with men and other beaches, but in multiple attempts to finally became the King of England, obviously, and his descendants went both to the U.S. and stayed in England. For example, right down the road from this beach, there's a castle called the Chateau de Conchy, and the Chaunceys. Obviously, if you've been to Cambridge, you know that the Chaunceys are a family that gave their name to numerous halls at Harvard, and the Chaunceys in England have a great castle, and the Allied forces are descendants of people who went over with William 900 years, coming back across the DNA crosses back during D-Day. So this incredible sense of interlocking history. At the same time as when you walk on the beach, it knows nothing of that, and it's that sense of how much we know and how much we can unknow and not know, and how we put unknowing into its right place. But I think the book seeks to figure out.
One of the questions I was going to ask you was, this is a book that's so deeply preoccupied with time. Why is it called Place? You've just answered that question, but something else that happens in that first poem is, I think, the very first use of the word place comes right after the noun life. So it's life, comma, a place. So it seems as though, just maybe talk a little bit about how you came to place as the title. It seems as though it's connected to this idea of the history that can be situated in one place, but also our lives as the place, and then I guess our own humanness and its place in this larger.
Well, just keep going. You're doing it.
Okay. That's good. I got you.
Yes, you've done it all. Emplacement, displacement, replacement.
Okay, so then moving on, so we covered that one. I want to go back to this question of the form of the poems, because they're so strikingly rendered, these long lines and the short lines. So tell me again about that, because I'm confused. So the long lines are to kind of situate us in time, in the past?
Well, first of all, there are enough poets in the room where I can say this music is working for me because it aids me to undergo dilation and constriction of time and modulation of emotion. And it's a difficult form in which to introduce thought. And it's a wonderful form in which to allow for the meticulousness of description, so that the resistance that the form has to the place with the intellect with the work is extremely useful. I'm sure you all understand why that's a good thing. The conceptual intellect wants to come in and ride roughshod over any piece of work that you do and know and take possession and name. And so this form is, you have to really earn it in here. I can tell immediately if the thinking is off because it's in the way. And at the same time, it kind of really takes apart, and it allows for slow motion, it allows for dilation, it allows for many different kinds of temporality to occur at once. It feels that way to me as in making it, so it allows me to inhabit those regions and come up with emotions, or be led to emotions by the speeding up and slowing down that I couldn't otherwise reach. And those emotions have a lot to do with what we're talking about, which is, how much are we rushing forward? How much can we hold ourselves in the moment? What is a human life in those two constraints and freedoms? You think of the future as open, and you move towards it, and you build a life, and you make plans. How much, if you took all that away, would you have if you had none of that construct, but you live precisely on the space-time axis in place, placed. So it does that for me. The amazing thing is that when I read the poems to record it, I read every line break. First I was sort of not reading the line breaks, and I had to go back and read the line breaks, and they lead me to the emotion that I had when I was writing the poem if I read the line breaks. If I don't read them, I don't get to the emotion in the same caliber, with the same discriminations, with the same subtleties. Same thing with the punctuation, which tells me that the form is doing its job. Because if it's doing it for me, then it's doing it for a reader who will read it, not for its sentences, but for its form. In other words, read it along, being guided by the form, as opposed to rushing forward to the conclusion of a sentence to figure out what the meaning is. Does that make any sense? So, and it does have to do with being able to move in one of the things that is interesting to me is how many different kinds of time not only one can inhabit simultaneously, but how many you can make happen for a reader, so that you feel yourself in simultaneously multiple kinds of time. You know, a time in which you're understanding and a time in which you're feeling. I mean, you know, that one poem that I read was about think, feel, and like, who's going to tell me the difference? Right? Where in the think, feel spectrum are we? Don't you guys want to sit down in all these chairs?
Well, that's interesting because when I was thinking about these poems, I was thinking one thing I felt so much about the work is the way it can think on the page. But as I was turning that over in my head, I wanted to remind you that this book is a think feeling.
Well, that's part of what this form does. It doesn't allow everything has to be stained with feeling, even the thinking. And this form, not that other forms don't. I mean, there are a third of the book is in left marked poems that are in left flush margins, and I'll read two of those when we close. And they tend to do a different kind of work. I'm tempted by, you know, I think I've learned as much as I can from this music. Ultimately, it's a very selfish activity. This music is teaching me a great deal. This way of perceiving form. I hadn't gotten done with it in sea change because I hadn't yet really understood what the extremely short line could do, and I hadn't yet understood really how much more I could see and how much more deeply I could slow down and feel until I used it in a more, even more strict way in the poems that are in that form in this book. One writes poems in order to have an experience that one cannot have except by writing the poems. Even if the information in the poems is something that one can know, and the narratives in them are something that one has experienced, that's not the nature of the experience of the poem. The poem is an experience in its own right, which gives rise to emotions, which are not the same emotions that one would have had. In a poem that I'll read to you, I am pushing my daughter in a swing. Or in another poem, it's the first memory, and my mother is finding me. The emotions that I think I had or had during the activities of those poems recount have nothing to do with the emotions that I, of course, discover by writing poems. That's the whole reason for being obsessed with writing poems. They give you a whole other avenue into the life that you think you've lived. There's just a great deal more the life that you've lived, layers and layers of it. And they are very, in the one poem I read, there's the woman in the house being foreclosed. There are the people in the street, the pigeons, the man who says that he's ill. There's the earth. You go beneath the earth. There's the soil. There's the bulb and the bottom rung underneath, and there's the imagination messing around down there with the bulb finally saying, "What the hell are you doing down here? Like, we don't need you. You know, go back up there to the repo man. You know, do something like that. Be accountable." It was very interesting for me to see that these layers, that this form elicited that kind of layering, which happens in a lot of poems.
One kind of layering I wanted to ask you about was there's a poem called "On the Virtue of the Dead Tree." A poem that really combines that has a moment when the speaker, or maybe it's the human soul that's actually speaking, says, "I will not listen for song anymore. I will listen for how dark comes on, the cringing wavering lights from their depths," and so on. And it's a poem about looking at the hawk in this dead tree. And that moment seemed to me to encapsulate a lot of the tensions in the book between the desire to praise or find beauty and the discovery that, which has been a discovery in many of the books, that beauty is insufficient as a mode. And I wondered if you might talk a little bit about
Well, it also involves this poem. Why don't I read this poem?
that would be great.
Can you hear me if I just read from here without having to do the podium thing? Yes? Well, actually, it's probably better if I stand up because I get more of my emotions. I'm sorry, I took my glasses. nephew is here, and he lived in the Chateau de Conchy for a long time. Both of my nephews are here. Happy birthday. One of them was born on June 6th, which is today. On the virtue of the dead tree, this tree is actually, I presume, still there in Normandy in a field that was part of where I lived for a long time. And the poem is about a hawk that I could count on, kind of remarkable. Every time I took the turn, the hawk came up off the branch. On the virtue of the dead tree, so my grandson just, and that you hold the same, I'm talking to the tree, right? And that you hold the same one hawk each day I pass through my field. And that it may choose its spot so freely from which to scan. And without more than the wintry, beguiling wing strokes seeding the fields of air swoop. It feeds. There is no wasteland where the dead oak lives. My darling, upstart vines on its trunk, swirling in ebb light, a desert of gone silent cells, where another force is gleaming, tardy, waning, summer or winter no longer truths, no prime, no year, no day where sun exists, just a still being here in this small, apparently silent, multitudinous world of infinite yearning and killing and sprouting, even now at the very start of the season, lengthening, invisible in their cracking open of pond and push, like the very first time we saw each other, you and I, impatient immediately. Blackness is the telephone wire. Blackness, the blissless instant communication, the twittering, poverty-killing behind and beneath and deep at the core of each screen, endless. Someone's breaking someone's fingers just now. Hear their laughter. Everyone in their prison, there in their human heart, which they cannot, for all the parting of flesh with cement-sluiced rubber, hose, and even the axe to the heart, reach. The fantasy of independence, escape. It wants them. It wants them to fly inside it. Fly, it screams, taser in hand. Prison is never going to be over. Day as it breaks is the principle gone, but with the hood on they cannot know this. Till it is finally sliced open, the beating heart. Loved ones shall pay ransom for the body of their child. To this friend, the hero is the dead tree, here in my field, mine. I have forced it. I have paid for it. My money like a wind flowing over it. Have signed the paperwork and seen my name there. And a cloud arrives from the east into it. And the prison grows too large to see. And it does not sing ever, my silent hawk. Always there when I arrive, before it startles on its chosen branch. And I think of the dead through trunk, the leafless limbs, the loosening of the deep drying roots in the living soil, and I slow myself to extend love to them, to their as yet still sturdy rotting, and how they hold up this gray-blue poverty of once sap-flowing limbs, their once everywhere turning branchings, for my small, hungry creature to glide from in his silence over the never for an instant not working rows of new wheat. It is good, says my human soul to the crop. I will not listen for song anymore. I will listen for how dark comes on to loosen the cringing, wavering mice from their dens, and how they creep up to the surfaces and out onto the surfaces, and how the surfaces yield their small gray velvet, barely visible in the last glow to that part of the world the dead tree sends forth. I have lived, I say to the evening. I have plenty of anger and am good and dry with late-breaking news. I am living, and the iron door of the night creeps and clicks, and the madness of the day hangs around restless at the edges of the last visible leaves with a reddish glow and moves them with tiny erratic swiftnesses, and the holy place shuts, baggy with evening. And here it is, finally night, bursting open with hunt. I can read, it's the one about my daughter, about my mother. I can do both. Swing poem, please. You guys want another one more poem? Do you have any questions? Should we ask for some questions? We'll close on this.
Any questions? I know the first is always the hardest, so I will keep talking until someone.
So, reading the book, I thought of this, but just hearing you read that poem, how long that multitudinous was a word, and there was a resonance, I have lived, I too lived, and even sort of the length of the lines and the way that some of the thought moves and really present. The speaker, the I, and sort of an environment. Selfishly, I'm just curious if you were reading Whitman, if you were thinking about Whitman in the writing of this, if there's a need for sort of a modern day Whitman voice to account for environmentally the place, the context in which we find ourselves.
A couple of things. Crossing Brooklyn Ferry has been a really important poem to me. I don't read him, but I internalized some of the, and I've never felt that Whitman's descriptive ability is his strength. Every now and then, in every single poem, at least in one place, is a sort of a pile-up of adjectives in which I'm trying to figure out, what the Whitmanian pile-up of adjectives is about in terms of multitudinous, or simultaneity, abundance, or excess, or scarcity. So I could say that this is a form which involves, overabundance and scarcity at the same time. But Crossing Brooklyn Ferry has always moved me because, along with poems so long, they are poems that are really among the many times that he addresses people in the future, which becomes kind of a tick. There are a couple of times when he really is addressing people in the future with a real sense of despair and anguish as to whether they will be there. Not just whether he will be read, but whether they will be there. And in that poem in particular, he does that. And you feel when he's looking down over the water that that he's not convinced that they will make it. And there's a kind of that part of Whitman, that anxiety about whether the future will be anything like what he imagines it to be, and whether the project of democracy is going to work out. I mean, I think he had intimations of the complete travesty and that we've ended up with. He had so many eggs in that basket, and the basket, the eggs broke, and he sensed that was going to happen. So that Whitman is really important to me. The long line is the long line. It's a line that's longer than a breath can contain, or do in one breathing. We assume that the pentameter line is more or less what a human breath. I'm not sure that they took yoga into account. The idea that what you do with a long line is that you have to make your breath larger than the one you live with, certainly the one you speak with. It's not a line intended to persuade. It's not a rhetorical line. It's not a line that's making an argument. The lines that are used to do that tend to be of the natural. You make a breath with. So this is a breathless, beyond breath. What is it? I'm not sure that I could tell you all the implications of a line that's larger than a breath, or to compels your body to endure a breath that's longer than the one that would allow you to naturally oxygenate and live. So it's compelling you to do more with your body, and then to swing back and pay a kind of attention that is almost without breath. And the idea of what breath is for, what are we living, what are we taking in, breath being the place where we take the world in, and we're so aware right now, I'm very aware of the degree to which the lungs of the planet is what we call the Amazon, forest. The ways in which we, when the trees come out in the northern hemisphere, the carbon numbers go way down because trees are this unbelievable carbon sink, and the leaves themselves it's hard not to just be aware of the fact that when the leaves come out, the air is completely different. They're actually eating up the exhaust of the carbon. So the feeling of what a breath is beyond species now for, I think, a great many people who are involved with eco-products of any kind. The idea of the human breath as opposed to the breath. That makes sense? So this line which is wanting to engage the breath is not the Whitmanian line that wants to engage, I think, the polis and the idea. It would be more involved with what one species' breath is as opposed to other kinds of breathing that are going on. It's very hard not to become, once you try to make yourself aware of the simultaneity of other species, not to become, it's hard to get rid of that once you do that. Once you start feeling a species feeling, even in New York City, there's just so much other life, and you're just such a small part of it. And to do that, you have to then negotiate with, what size and how much room your body takes up, not just in terms of damage, but just in terms of proportion. And so, does that answer the question? So it's a bringing forward of certain kind of Whitmanian anxieties, but they are anxieties that I would say were present in Hopkins. And for me, Hopkins is more behind this book than anybody else. Nobody else can bring a bird down through the sky. And the minute you do it, you're just in conversation with Hopkins. Yes.
I was really struck by what you said in the beginning about the unknown, about reading your poems aloud and hearing certain things that you were unaware of, and yet you know the lines so well, or down to the syllables, and I'm a fiction writer, and there's when I have that experience of mystery, it always seems to me that my characters are doing things that are unexpected. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective as a poet, if you could say more about that experience of the unknown. Yeah.
Say goodbye to your next person.
Yeah, of course.
Happy birthday. One's children.
Can we all come hug?
You can all hug them. You mean how much the ratio of unknowing to knowing, or for agency and motive?
Just your experience of what else you learned, and as you were reading those poems, what else?
I learn something every time I even read them.
Mm-hmm.
But I learn that with every poet's work. It's really the only way to do this for a lifetime is to not feel that what you want is to make poems, but is to feel. I've always thought that it's an addiction to what the kind of experience you can have that keeps developing. And, you keep changing in your understanding of your relationship to what is not you. And so every time it's not just that the occasion of the poem or the subject of the poem, whether it be a memory or language itself or whatever, keeps you honest. And that phrase has a lot of complications, and it's wonderful. What does it mean? It means that the boundary of what your consciousness can do keeps being, tested. And it's a kind of wonderful humility involved in enforced humility involved in just what syntax makes you do. And you you might have an idea of what you want to do. The syntax pushes back in you, says there's something else you could do here, and then you think, I didn't know that. Thank you, syntax. Thank you, line break. Who knew? And so those are the secrets that keep one. Otherwise, why would one? It's not like one is producing a career. It's not like he pays money. So why would one keep doing it except for the fact that there's so much chastening in it. There's so much sense that you set out with these enormous ambitions and then break the silence and take a beautiful piece of silence and trammel it with language. So if you're going to do that, you better have a darn good reason, and you better figure out in writing what that reason was. If you sit down with the reason, all you'll do is get up with an answer to a question you already knew the answer to. But if you sit down with a kind of, an energy, but with an unknowing and not knowing, it's in that first poem I say, the answer to my, how's that thing go? And I just turned to answer the answer to my answer. In other words, there is no answer. There's just nothing but to say. I think we're done. Shall we get? If there are any more questions? I don't know what time it is.
It's 8 o'clock.
Sounds good.
You want to read one last poem?
I'll read one last poem. I'll read a short poem.
Thank you.
This is what I think of as a relatively conservative poem. But I would like to say that one of the things about this poem, which is based on my first memory, is that I just would ask you to pay attention to that swooping down of the hawk. This poem has an activity that has to do with, in the act of writing, it's very much what you were asking me as I undergo this experience of trying to deal with what is an actual very first early memory. The way in which my first person is awakened and swoops down into the poem and threads through it in the way that I think of it as very related to that hawk. So the hunt for where one's first person is, not to mention one's first personhood, not to mention the beginning of where one begins to be a person, which is not necessarily at birth. But this is the year of my birth, Cagnes-sur-Mer town, hilltop town, very medieval hilltop town in South France. I am the only one, I love this first line, it sounds so arrogant. I am the only one who ever lived who remembers my mother's voice in the particular shadow cast by the sky-filled Roman archway, which darkens the stones on the down-sloping street up which she has now come again suddenly. How the archway and the voice and the shadow seize the small triangle of my soul violently, as in a silent film where the accompaniment becomes a mad body for the spirits, skipping images, abandoned homeland, miracle from which we come back out alive. So here, from there, again, I read it off the book of time, my only time, as if in there is a fatal mistake of which I cannot find the nature or shape or origin. I pick up the infant and place it back again to where I am a small reservoir of blood, 12 pounds of bone and sinew and other matters already condemned to this one soul which we are told weighs less than a feather or as much as 4 ounces when grown. As if I could travel, I back up those arteries, up the precious liquid, across the field of methods, agonies, astonishments. May I not squander the astonishments. May I not mistakenly kill brother, sister. I will sit once again so boldly at my beginning, dark spot where one story does not yet become another, and words which have not yet come to me will not yet try to tell where each thing emerges, where it is heading, and where the flow of tendency will shine on its fast way downhill. And it will seem to me that all this is legend, one of those in which there is no way to look back, and yet you do, you pay for it, yes, but you do. It was a hilltop town in the South in summer. It was before I knew about knowing. My mind ran everywhere and was completely still at the center, and that did not feel uncomfortable. A bird sang. It added itself to the shadow under the archway. I think from this distance that I was happy. I think from this distance. I sat. It was before I knew walking. Only my soul walked everywhere without weight. Where the road sloped downhill, there was disappearance, which was exactly what I imagined should happen. Appearance and disappearance in my only life. When my mother's voice got closer, it had a body. It had arms, and they were holding something that must have been a basket. My mind now can go round her, come in front, and wrap her as her arms wrapped that basket. And it must have been wicker, because I see in the light the many loosened browns, the white tips, as she steps out of the shadow in which nothing but her hands and the front of her active carrying are visible. And when her body arrives, it is with the many lemons entirely struck, entirely taken by sunshine, which the heavy basket is still now carrying, and her bright fingernails woven into each other, and her face with its gaze searching for me. Gaze which felt like one of the bright things she was carrying in front of herself, a new belly. All I was to invent in this life is there in the wicker basket among the lemons. Having come from below the horizon where the sound of the market rises, up into the private air in which she is moving, where she is still a whole woman and a willing woman. And I hear what must be prices and names called out of flowers and fruit and meat and live animals in small cages, all from below us at the bottom of the village, from that part which is so comfortable to me, which is invisible, and in which everything has to be sold by noon. I think that was the moment of my being given my name, where I first heard the voices carrying the prices, as her face broke and a smile appeared, bending down towards me, saying, "There you are, there you are."